Morning. Before we start, I'm going to do a little business here. I wrote a book, 2017, and of course with COVID, it put a stop kind of to my selling. Otherwise, unless people were on Amazon or something. So I have a few books left, and when I started selling them, they were $59.99, but I'm going to sell them now for $20 so that I get rid of them. So if anybody wants the history of Luxembourg, if you have family that came from there or married into Luxembourg, you will find all that information in that book. So, all right, I'm going to get on with the founding of the Luxembourg American Military Cemetery. The founding of the American Cemetery and its relationship with the Battle of the Bulge that took place from December 16th, 1944 to January 15th, 1944. If you have visited Luxembourg, you have probably stopped at the cemetery, and this is what you saw. Rows and rows of our American heroes. Crosses on top of many tombstones and the Star of David on others. Ordinary men that met by chance to fight side by side to win the Battle of the Bulge. This is the final resting place of General George Patton. The rows form in a triangle, so they look like they're standing at attention, facing George Patton. Oops, I guess I gotta click it twice there. One more. There we go. I'm getting cool at this. Okay, the construction of the Luxembourg Military Cemetery in Ham, Luxembourg. Now, I was very fortunate to receive two first-hand accounts and several pictures and 2 letters of the building of the cemetery in 1945. The 2 letters were written by Ferd and Albert Dumont, who were able to watch the building of the cemetery. Ferd, by his writing, sounds like he might have been a teenager, and Albert either an older brother or his father. I don't have any indication of their ages. I had to have some help with the translation for some of the words, and some of the words were still impossible for me to pronounce. In that case, I will use the English word instead. Oh, baby. Am I going the wrong? Oh, there we go. I went the wrong way. Okay, letter 1.
Can you talk into the mic?
I'm sorry. Letter 1 by Ferd Dumont and what he experienced at the beginning of the cemetery in his own words. You can read along with me because it's hard to, some of it we will go back to afterward. This is Ferd. Early in the morning on a Sunday in January 1945, I biked to the field, and it was still dusky, to fetch a bottle of milk before the milk cans were taken away by the dairy trucks. Whole unskimmed milk coming directly from the farmer was a valued product for a family of 6. We also had 3 other sources of supply. These are all names of fields. Yannick Waldbilling was a small farmer by profession and a milkman with a horse and carriage who was always on tour in the early morning hours. He had 1 cow in his stable whose milk was welcome to many of the neighbors. the field came from Poland. His name was Witkowski. When I arrived at his place that day, he was telling his wife that an American delegation was at the pasture triangle of, never try to pronounce that word, of his field, because that's where a proposed cemetery for soldiers was going to be. An important decision that concerned the farmer a lot. Enough reason for him to use profane swear words. It was a custom of his to swear terribly at every fit and unfit occasion. That's how he found out that he lost his best farmland in an idyllic location with fertile soil, easy to cultivate, and that had brought in a rich wheat harvest last fall. Not loamy like on the east side of the courtyard, where marshy land points to a heavy, sticky soil that demands a lot of work of the draught horse and the farmer. After the grain harvest, we spent many hours as gleaners on this large farming area. The milled wheat grains turned into bran, white flour with the help of a handheld vibrating screen, an invention of Victor Grossberg, master joiner, which means builder, from Ham, a real fuss pot. Straw and bran were for the rabbits. Soon thereafter, the farmland and part of the woods got partially fenced in and screened with canvas, but that did not keep out noisy boys' glances. In the coming months, a steady flow of trucks came through the large wood gateway. When we collected wood in the shea forest, we noticed a sweet, nauseating smell. Smoke pointed towards the burning of indeterminate items. Noteworthy was the steady traffic at the upper end of the pasture. There, through the large wooden door, with a white sign that said U.S. Cemetery, a constant stream of GMC trucks went in and out. For some time, GMC trucks were stationed in Ham at night. They hid an open secret. They carried the remains of fallen soldiers from the murderous Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes. All of a sudden, the people of Ham were part of this macabre event. Jan Sievert, the conductor of the church choir of Ham, was the first one who came up with the idea to organize a memorial service in honor of the deceased soldiers. Official permission followed. Present at the High Mass in their better battle dress was a company of American soldiers that lived in the school and belonged to the burial service. On Sunday afternoon, in dreary March weather, the priest Jacques Schmidt and the choir and lots of villagers, as well as a delegation of scouts from Luxembourg City, assembled on a wet, moist field. This was at the outer edge of the cemetery, where shortly before a large wooden cross had been erected. The participants took the shorter field path, gar, and uphill path through field and wood and crossed the railroad at the pedestrian crossing. A citizen of Ham, Victor Gazer, and an American officer gave the commemorative address in English. Between two songs, Antony Oath and Gaston Mose, two conscripts, lay a wreath on one of the fresh graves that were marked with a wooden cross. Present was an honor guard company of American soldiers attached to the burial service. They gave a salute by volley fire. And this is the end of Ferd Dumont's letter. Letter 2, the first memorial service at the American Cemetery by Albert Dumont. During a practice of our church choir in the winter of 1945, after the liberation, we were once again allowed to pursue that practice. The conductor, Jan Sievert, thought it would not be right to just gawk at those horrible transports of dead soldiers passing through our village, but that it was our duty to express our sympathy to the Americans. He proposed to sing during a solemn mass for the deceased soldiers, and the club accepted that suggestion immediately. Jan Sievert talked to the priest and Mr. Dries, doorkeeper at the school in Ham, where the American soldiers of the burial service lodged, and informed them of our proposal. Palm Sunday was a suitable day for the service. The church was festively decorated, and the people from Ham and the American soldiers witnessed a high mass sung by our choir. Afterward, the choir, joined by some people from Ham in the village, children wandered through a field path on the Gar uphill to the cemetery that was just starting to be set. The priest blessed the freshly excavated cemetery plots. The choir took over the vocal music. A funeral wreath was placed on a grave, and Victor Kaiser gave a speech in English. The commander in charge of the burial service gave a special thanks to the choir for their engagement. The city of Luxembourg was represented by a section of scouts who also placed a wreath. An honor guard of the cemetery personnel fired the salute over the graves. The people of Ham wanted to retain those celebrations on Palm Sunday. Already in 1946, a procession moved through the streets to the cemetery, and sheaves of flowers and a wreath were deposited there, which still continues to this day. The American Charge d'Affaires, George Waller, was invited, but he was prevented from coming. Afterward, he sent me a written message of gratitude because I had mailed him my pictures of the first memorial service. Since then, this Palm Sunday commemoration has turned into a lasting tradition, always attended by the American ambassador. And that's the end of the letter by Albert Dumont. All right, these pictures are about 78 years old, so I cleaned them up the best I could. This is a picture of the High Mass, the first High Mass that was said. All right, this is the Palm Sunday High Mass. And when they talk about the celebration in the field, this is a picture of the priest Jacques Schmidt. You can see him right there, and the cross behind it. The gates to the first cemetery. The laying of the wreath. You can see on the right the conscript. Conscript is a man who does not really want to be in the service, but is told that he has to be in the service. And then the scouts laying a wreath on the other side. And here's a picture of what it looked like at first. You can see the burials and the crosses. And then the sign, the U.S. Military Cemetery, Luxembourg. This is part of the burial squad. And these are soldiers. It was winter at that time, so it was important to get the men buried as quickly as possible. So you can see they were wrapped in a cloth, and then a mound of dirt was put over them. Another picture, you can see how deep down they were buried at that time, not 6 feet like we do now. I tried to find out if, because somebody asked me if they were ever put in a coffin and vault, and I looked and looked through every resource and I couldn't find it. My supposition is that afterward they put more landscaping over it, because otherwise you would see indentations, and there are none. Another picture of the cemetery and the burial squad. I don't show any deceased people's faces. That was important to me, that we don't show them. Whether this man is deceased or injured is unknown. Now, this is the only woman buried in the cemetery. Nancy Leo, an Army nurse from Maryland, is the only woman buried among the 5,076 soldiers in the Luxembourg American Cemetery. She died in a Jeep accident in Paris on July 24th, 1945. And I put this picture in when I found it. I mean, this is what the young children saw during their youth. And we think COVID is hurting our young children. Just imagine what a war would do to young people. Just a minute here. The American Cemetery in Ham, Luxembourg was established on December 29, 1944 by the 609th Quartermaster Company of the U.S. Third Army, while Allied forces were containing the German Ardennes offensive in the winter of 1944-1945. Total burials, 5,073, unknown, 101. The cemetery consists of 17 acres of manicured lawn surrounded by 33.5 acres of woods. This is the final resting place for those that gave all for peace. And again, a picture as it looks today. This is a picture of the chapel that they've erected there. And this is what it looks like inside. It's very beautiful. This picture does not do it justice. And on either side of the chapel are pillars showing the battle routes of each division. That I saw it in person, but I didn't pay too much attention to that, so I can't, unless you were there, I can't give a lot of information on that. Okay, we cannot talk about the Luxembourg Cemetery without mentioning the German cemetery, which is a quarter mile away and built by the Americans. This is the entrance to the cemetery. Thousands of German soldiers lost their lives in battle within the Luxembourg borders. Many were buried in mass graves in 160 cemeteries throughout Luxembourg, with only incomplete records of the deceased. In 1952, the German War Graves Commission transferred their bodies to graves in Sandweiler, where the soldiers found their lasting resting place in the military cemetery on land reserved especially for that purpose. This operation also offered the opportunity to identify the soldiers. Of the 10,913 German soldiers buried at Sandweiler, 4,829 are buried in this, well, you can't see the whole depth of this, but they are buried in what is called a comrade's grave, and a plaque with their names listed by the grave reads, "In common grave, there are 4,829 German soldiers. They fell in the winter of 1944-1945. The last interred soldiers' remains were those of an unknown German soldier discovered in the forest near Wreaths in 2007. Isn't that amazing? This is the view of the graves in the German cemetery. It doesn't have the beauty of the American cemetery. Oh, I would like to conclude with a few adages. Unfortunately, most of what we know about people living in other countries, we learned in times of war. Author unknown. And the great Albert Einstein, I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. And lastly, we pray for all our beautiful young soldiers, past and present, that sacrificed their lives for us. The end. Now, does anybody have, you know, I'm speaking into this, not into this. Did you notice that? No. You noticed it? Oh, gosh. Does anybody have any questions?
Over here.
Oh, yes.
I have a couple. Number one, isn't, I know the cemeteries, American cemeteries in France, are now American property. Is that also same with Luxembourg, that's part of the U.S. soil?
Yes, but this is just the ones who died in Luxembourg that are buried there. And
But the cemetery itself,
the cemetery itself is, they died there, and that burial squad picked them up. That was their job, to pick them up in Luxembourg. No, am I not right?
No, that's not what he's
that's
asking.
not the question.
Oh, okay, then I got it wrong.
Is the cemetery American property?
Yes, yes, it is.
That's
And
the
it's
first-
taken care of by the Americans.
Tell me how George Patton is buried there. Why is he buried there? Tell me about his life and death.
Okay, well, George Patton, of course, you know, led most of the Battle of the Bulge. In about 1945 or so, he was in a Jeep accident and died. And there is some conspiracy behind it, if he really died that way, or the military wanted him out of the way. You can't find the truth, you know, the government, they say what they want. But anyway, the official record is that he died in died in a Jeep accident.
And so then he was buried there rather than in Arlington.
He was buried there in the Luxembourg Cemetery. At first, he was not at the head. He was buried in amongst the soldiers. But so many people wanted to see George Patton that they were wrecking the cemetery looking for him. So they moved him up to the front. And when they moved him up to the front, if you go there, it's a very beautiful sight because it looks like all the soldiers are standing at attention looking at him because of the way it fans out. So, and another question? That was it? Oh, you gave me both both questions, Amy? Yes, Chris?
I just read recently that General Patton asked to be buried there.
He did. He
Yeah.
did. When he died, yes. Mhm. And any more?
I heard that the Battle of the Bulge had a different name as well. Do you know what that name is?
No, I think that was what they called it in America, and I'm sure there is a Luxembourg word for it, but no, I don't, I'm sorry. That's the only name I've ever heard for it. Anything else? I'm sorry, I can't answer that. Yes?
Do you know if the German cemetery is German property or not?
No, it was turned over to the Americans. That's why the Americans
They,
went around and the 160 small graves that they were in, moved them into that plot that was reserved for the German soldiers that died in Luxembourg, not in other countries. And also, if one of your children died in the war, you became a Gold Star mother, but you had the opportunity to bring your child home and have them buried here in La Crosse, or have them buried with his fellow soldiers. And the fact that so many soldiers are there, I only know of a couple that brought them home by reading newspaper articles, if they weren't. I spent a lot of time at the La Crosse Library reading all the war information. So that's what I got from that. Heather wasn't there then, but I know Anita, who's still there. I was there probably 2 or 3 times a week, and I made a lot of noise. I'm not very good at closing doors softly. So I think they were glad when I was done, but nobody said anything. But anything else? Yes?
Do you know how far this cemetery is from Luxembourg City proper?
It's only a few miles, because, Luxembourg is very small. It's, yeah, it's about the size of La Crosse County, maybe even a little smaller. It's, 48 miles wide by 98 long, is that right, Marlene? Yep, I thought that was Marlene behind the mask. Yes, it is, okay. So it's a very small country. We have visited there 3 times. It's lovely over there. They don't have the separation of church and state, and they love the Americans. If you have an American decoration on you, they will pull you over and talk to you because they are still so happy that they liberated them. And I don't know if any of you saw or heard of the American St. Nicholas. This is kind of beside the point, but I have time to go into it. In Wiltz, Luxembourg, it was the resting place for the soldiers. That was where they take leave. Religion wasn't allowed to be preached, or talked about, the young kids had never heard of St. Nicholas. So the soldiers decided that one of them would dress up and be St. Nicholas and pass out treats. So they got together all the things that their parents had sent to them and stuff. And a Richard Brooking put on, borrowed the priest robe, and I don't know, was it a mop or something that put on his face? And anyway, in a Jeep with two little girls dressed as angels, they drove and had a party. And there is a movie on it, and you should look up Richard Brooking. But after that, 2 weeks later, Wilkes was totally bombed, gone, and they rebuilt it. And when they started up the St. Nicholas things again, they wanted to remember the American St. Nicholas. So every year, instead of having a regular St. Nicholas, they would have St. Nicholas come in an American Jeep. And that went on to this day. And at first, they used the men from the village, but then one day they got the idea, we should look up and see if this Richard Brookings is still alive. Well, they did, and he lived in New York. And can you remember what year he first went over there? Well, when they found him, they invited him over, and every year until 2013, he went and he was the American St. Nicholas, the original one. And it's a lovely story. I mean, it's very sad to see pictures of all these children, and you wonder how many survived the bombing. But that's war, and I don't know about you, but we are hoping World War III is not around the corner. But any other questions? Yes?
Do you know how far the American soldiers' bodies were brought in order to get to the cemetery?
Well, it would have been in the northern part because the Battle of the Bulge took place, well, in the northern part of Luxembourg, France, Belgium, in that whole area. But the soldiers that were, yes,
The city of Bastogne is,
Bastogne,
yes,
yes.
was our headquarters, so it's not that far.
Like
Yeah.
maybe 10 or 20 miles?
It's a little further than that.
Oh, okay.
I think 40 or 50, but still,
Okay.
that's not
Yeah.
far
Yeah.
over there.
Yes.
And Bastogne would be considered what country? Would that be?
Belgium.
Belgium.
And if you go to Europe, you should really go to Bastogne because you get the whole Battle of the Bulge.
Right here. Okay.
Yes. Also at the cemetery too, the pylons have the total map of where
Yes.
everything occurred. But I'm sure the other countries, and I know when they talk about the war, they talk about Belgium, they hardly ever mention Luxembourg. So, go ahead.
I was just wondering if they know why the Battle of the Bulge was fought. That December, Allied Air Force, of course, American Air Force, would bomb all the German tanks. But a big weather front came in and whited everything out. And so then the Germans decided to counterattack. As soon as it cleared off that January, we went in and saved our troops in the air power.
Oh, I'm glad you have that knowledge. No, you go for it. Anything you know beyond, I'm happy to hear. I'm sure everybody else is. Go ahead.
I don't know if you heard, there was one very sad incident where the SS caught several of our soldiers and lined them up and summarily shot them. And that was one of the worst atrocities in the Second World War. As a result of that, unfortunately, when we caught some of the Germans, the Americans, some of the soldiers shot the German
Recreation.
Yes.
Christmas.
Yeah, Christmas.
Yes, and did you hear the story, and this is true, about on Christmas Day, how the Germans and the Americans were fighting and they decided on Christmas Day not to fight? They got together and had a Christmas feast, and then, of course, the next day went back and tried to kill each other again, but, any other? Yes,
Where did your initial interest in this come from?
where did my interest come from? Well, I didn't know I had Luxembourg in me until 1993. My grandfather was pure Luxembourg, but he thought he was French because his mom and dad, my great-grandparents, married in France. And they moved from Luxembourg to France and then to America. So during those days, they didn't really talk about the old days like we do. They weren't interested in history. So he knew that his mother and dad lived in France, and so he always considered himself French. Until I started doing research, I decided to do family history, and I found out that he was pure Luxembourg. But by then he had passed on. And so I kind of got the family interested in Luxembourg. Most of us now have dual citizenships. So that was something that was kind of important to us. I know Marlene's family back there, much of her family have, and the young children, if you have children under 18 and you get your dual citizenship, they automatically, right, become citizens. So it's kind of interesting. I hope at some time that doesn't cause problems. Do you have something to say, Marlene?
No.
No? Oh, you look like you do. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the language, of course, people speak both French and German in Luxembourg.
Yes.
It's interesting when we listen because some of the German words get into the French and vice versa. So the word that I was listening to, I speak somewhat German, is the word fair marriage. I thought was an interesting combination of German and French. Fair means horse, and you know what marriage means. What comes out the back end of the horse.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I got that.
So we always fair marriage. That was my favorite.
You know, we always remember the dirty words, don't you? I can remember that from German class in high school. All the words that the nuns didn't teach, we remember those. But no, they're very educated over there. They speak not only French and German and American, but they also speak their own language, which is Luxembourgish, which is what you're talking about, a combination of French and German. It wasn't a written word until the 1980s that it was put down on paper. But there are still people, I don't think in La Crosse, but in Belgium, Wisconsin, there's a big Luxembourg community where there are several people who still can speak the language. So, I mean, and if you go over there, you must have been there.
Yes.
Yes. So you know how interesting their language is, but we being Americans, we expect them to talk to us in English, you know? So we don't, but you know, each year in school they are taught a different language. And we know one woman who speaks 7 different languages because of Portugal and all the countries around there. And I asked her what language she dreams in, because that just seems to me like so much. She says it depends on the night.
Oh, gosh.
So I found that interesting. Any other questions? Dave?
Yes, I was over in Luxembourg, and I was at the cemetery, and then we went over there, my daughter went with me, and so forth, and we got dual citizenship, just because our ancestors, some of them came from Luxembourg.
Yes, yes. I think it's, with dual citizenship, we are allowed to vote in the Luxembourg elections. We get a card that entitles us to vote, but I have not voted because I don't know enough about the people who run for elections. I don't think you should, even here in La Crosse, if you don't know the people, I don't vote just because the name sounds good, you know. So, so I have not taken the opportunity to vote. Have you, Dave?
No, I haven't been a dual citizenship that long yet. It's every 5 years, isn't it? I think you vote, you can't vote.
I can't, that I don't know. Marlene, do you know, is it every 5 years?
I don't know, but they have multiple parties, like 5, 6, 7 parties, so it's a puzzle.
Yeah, it is a puzzle. Yes.
What do you do to get dual citizenship?
Well, it's easy or it's hard, depending on your family line. You have to go back to the first man who immigrated, and then you follow the male line all the way down to you. It used to be you could follow the male or female line, but a couple years ago, they cut off using the female line. So I was able to get it because my grandfather, and then so my father, and so forth, all the way back to the great males had Luxembourg, so I was able to get it. But if my grandmother would have been the Luxembourger and not my grandfather, I would not be able to get it right at this time until hopefully they change the law again.
So your children can't get it because you're female, is that right?
I break the line, yes, because my children are older than 18. If they were younger, yes, they could get it. But one of my grandsons is working on getting it, and I don't know how he's going around it. But the person he's working with, Marlene?
Yeah, once you're established, once you send your papers and your direct line can submit on your, just pick up from where you left off.
Oh,
And
even if
submit
my
the
daughter?
paperwork. I
My-
think so, yeah, I think she can do it too.
I'm not sure about that, but maybe so, maybe so. It is complicated. Go ahead.
Question, can you get a passport?
Yes,
From
I
Luxembourg?
Yes, you get a
Yeah.
passport, you get a voting card, and you get,
That means you can
A
travel with
certificate.
a
yeah.
person from Luxembourg then, huh?
And then there's a little card that you could get too that allows you to travel around Europe without your passport. I forget what it's called, but it's something like your driver's license.
but if you leave the United States with your United States passport, don't come back with your Luxembourg passport, because that will make you stay a long time in line to want to know why you're coming, you know.
Oh, yeah, right.
It's like an illegal alien kind of a thing. So, but traveling around Europe, it's great to have that passport. So, yes, Chris?
Isn't there more to it than just tracing the line to get that citizenship? Because I know that's one of the things.
Well,
that's stopping me.
you have to trace it, but you have to, now see, my sister did it first, so I was really lucky. You have to get a certified birth and death and marriage certificate from the first one, second one, third one, all the way down to your mom and dad, and then my birth certificate, I only needed my birth certificate and my marriage certificate because I used the same person my sister did, and he had all the records so I was really, really lucky. Otherwise, I would have, but most of the family came from across county, so it wasn't
But
hard
isn't
to
there
trace.
a fee and you have to go over to the country?
There is a fee. It depends on who you go to. You can go through the LACS in Belgium, Wisconsin, or you can go through a man named Kevin Wester. That's who I went through. I don't know, I think Marlene went through the LACS. The fee depends on how much work it is, you know, on how much work he has to put into, because he'll find the records for you if you don't have them. But, or they do. Go ahead, Marlene.
Yeah, there's a hitch that once the papers are submitted, they have to be translated into French.
Yes.
So everything, because French is the official language of the Luxembourg government now. Hasn't always been, but it is now.
Yes. And isn't part of the government German and part of the government French?
No.
It was at one time.
It's all French now.
Okay. But yes, then you submit your papers. Whoever you use will submit the papers, and then you'll get back an official letter that you're a citizen. And now you have two choices. You could go to Washington, D.C., and there's the Luxembourg ambassador lives there, and you can get your passport and your voting card there, or you can go to Luxembourg and do the same thing. Going to Luxembourg is more fun. Yes?
Do you remember when you were in Luxembourg, I think it's called the Casemates?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, can you tell about that?
You're talking, oh gosh, I wish I had a picture of it.
Bob, do you know about that? Where it's like a huge, like, fortress.
Yes.
And there were these,
Our hotel was right by that when we went
called
over.
the Casemates, I think, and I think it's part of, is it the bridge? But people.
The Red
were
Bridge,
sheltered.
they call it,
Big shelters there. Hundreds of people were saved.
by the caves in there.
Because there were like caves, yes.
Yes, and I think they were ruins from Rome or some other
From like 1,000
civilization.
years ago or more.
Yes, yes.
Yes, that was really fascinating. If you ever go, anybody, make sure you see the casemates.
Yes, and they're long. You might not want to, you almost need a guide because they kind of twist and it's like a maze
Right, it is.
under there.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's an interesting place to go.
What is
Plus
it
all the
called?
museums.
It's called the Casemates.
Spell.
Casemates, the Casemates.
Oh.
Look it up on your computer and then you'll see exactly the
Well, I
pictures
need
of it.
To hear how it was spelled.
Yes. No, that was a good, anybody else have any information or anything they want to talk about? Certainly.
When I was in college, a couple of years ago, Luxembourg Airlines, that's how we would just hop on these DC-6s, and it would take forever to get there, but you'd fly into Luxembourg, and I think even then it was $200 round trip for the flight.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I think from Luxembourg you have to fly to Belgium and then from Belgium to the United States now.
Yeah, now,
No, it's
but back then,
Yeah,
you're in Luxembourg.
those, your Luxembourg, yes. Let's see, what else? I think I am finished and those are our other questions. And if there are 2 sample books up here, if you want to look at them, they are $20. Sell out, trying to get rid of them. Oh, I didn't say, it's in the Library of Congress, it's in the Luxembourg National Library, so it has been well received, so it will be part of my heritage. So anyway, and you might find your name